What? That'll be 66.
It's a baby.
And that'll be the third one. So what are you going to say then?
I don't know if the first one counts. You won't know this.
Of course it counts. Okay. וזהו ואכלתם אכול.
פירוש.
פירוש דבר שכבר נאכל, תחזרו ותאכלו אותו. So everybody on the pasuk says that אכלתם אכול ושבוע means that you will be given back the produce that you missed, because Yoel was in the time of a great famine that was caused by locust.
But that was a different type of one as the plague in Egypt, because it was all different sorts of locusts.
Right. So there was no food for a while. And then his prophecy for the short term, right? All the prophecies, they have a short term and they have an eternal message. So the short term prophecy was that the 4 years that you missed, that there was no food because the locust had consumed everything. Apparently even consumed the seeds in the earth. There was nothing left. So these 4 years, you'll make them up in 1 year. And then that's why it says, "V'achaltem achol v'savo." Yeah, sort of like that. And then they ask questions, the Mepharshim ask a question, how can it be that in 1 year you could get the 4 years worth? Okay, in any case, but the long-term message is a little bit different. It's not that you'll make up what you missed, but rather that you will eat what you ate.
Was that like a cow, like a ruminant?
Yeah, that's what we talked about yesterday. פירוש דבר שכבר נאכל תחזרו ותאכלו אותו. That what was already eaten once, you will eat again. Meaning, we said, what does it mean that it was eaten once? That the angels eat their contemplation of God, and what comes out is produce here on earth. Yeah, on earth. In the physical sphere, the physical dimension, what comes out is the produce that the earth grows. And there's a whole question, for instance, by there's a question in halacha. If a tree, if you took fruit from a tree and you wanted to bring it bikurim, but before you got a chance to bring it to the temple as the first fruit of that year, the tree was watered by a fountain and it dried up. So can you bring it? So there's two different opinions.
So you didn't get the fruits.
Huh?
You got fruits.
Yeah, but there's a question. Why? Very interesting.
Be more fruits afterwards.
No. Question is whether it's still considered to be from a tree. Because if its source of water dried up, then it's not considered. There's a shita in the Gemara.
What is it now, or what was it then? What it was then?
Great question. I'm skipping all these questions. Very good question. But what does it mean? What's the status of the fruit? Is it still considered to be first fruit that you can bring to the temple? And there's an opinion that says no, because the moment that the tree is dependent on water, and the water source is gone, so it's like the tree is gone, and you can't bring from something that doesn't exist anymore. It's not the fruit. You're not bringing for the fruit itself. You're bringing for the fact that the tree gave fruit. But the tree is no longer here. The other opinion is no, it's only the land that is important. So if it's still rooted in the ground, then you can still bring the first fruit. If the land is eroded so terribly and dried up so terribly that the tree fell over, and it's not in the ground anymore, then you can't. That's what was possible.
If there was a flood out it,
huh?
they'd have to dry up. There can be a flood and it can float away.
No, that's not discussed there. So anyway, so you see here that there's a continued connection even between the fruit and the earth, and the definition there is that because the earth is there, and the earth is the main part of where of what grows the tree, not the water. Therefore, as long as the tree is still in the ground, the fruit is still considered to be part of that tree. It's a very interesting thing that the sages don't see it as the fruit being disconnected. It could be that it's just something about Bikurim, because they don't say the same thing about like the bracha. They don't say because the tree is gone, you don't say Borei Pri Ha'etz. You don't need to know whether the tree that this apple came from still exists. Nobody cares. But by Bikurim, where you give praise to Hashem, so you see that the chain has to be.
If you have no tree left anymore, then there's nothing to praise Hashem.
Right. There's no connection anymore. I thought about that yesterday. That's like an example that you see that this cascade going down from the angels contemplating Hashem and then bringing down the fruit. In the end, fruit being grown from that, it has some significance. And there's definitely a significance in the lotus.
Which is
The Asherah, that's in Brachos. It's in Daf Lamed Tet or Mem, something like that.
I think it's time I did Brachos again.
Okay. דהיינו הנשמות דעתה שכבר היו בבחינת אדם יחזרו ויוכלו אותן להעלותן למעלה יותר. But the same thing that we saw there, that what they ate, what the angels ate, and they consume contemplation of God, becomes our produce. The same thing is that the souls of now will become the food, the produce for the souls of the future, for the new souls. And we said that you don't have to understand it necessarily as somebody's going to come and eat you. It could be you yourself. It can be you yourself, your own processes that have to continue to build one on the other. וזהו והיללתם את השם אלוקיכם אשר עשה עמכם להפליא. And the end of the verse there in Yoel is, you shall praise Hashem who did wonders with you. כי לעתיד, אחר כל הבירורים והעליות שיתעלו כל הדברים התחתונים על ידי הנשמות דעתה, והנשמות דעתה על ידי הנשמות שיתגלו לעתיד, אז יהיה אשת חי לטרף בעלה. So then, in the future, after all these processes finish and all the elevation happens by this eating, then we will see the fulfillment of the verse, a woman of valor is the crown of her husband, which means that what was below will now become above, meaning it'll switch, everything will flip. And that's what's in the Arizal is the kav coming all the way down, the ray of infinite light touching the end of reality, and then there's no bottom or top because he describes it like it's a circle, right? It's not physically a circle, but it's in that respect that you can't tell anymore what's up and what's down. And then what was down now becomes just as much up as what used to be up. בבחינת אור חוזר ממטה למעלה כתר מלכות. And that's why it's called reflected light from below to above, and that reflected light will then be called the crown of kingdom. שיהיה מלכות בבחינת כתר. That the kingdom, which was the lowest of the sfirot until now, will now become suddenly the crown. It doesn't mean that the crown won't be the crown anymore. It will also be the crown. It'll be two crowns. That's what's called two crowns, two kings using one crown. Okay? There's a crown here and a crown there. It's the same crown. Because in the circle, there's no difference between top and bottom. It's the same thing. All the points in the circle are one thing. And then it'll be kingdom that will give off all the sustenance. The lowest, the one that was receiving until now, will be the source. And it's a complete switch or flip. It says in that day, living waters, meaning a fountainhead, will come out of Jerusalem. Half of them to the, you could say that it's the eastern sea, but it also means to the origin sea. What's the origin sea? The origin sea is where Torah came from. Okay. The Torah will come out of Yerushalayim, the living fountain.
Torah came from Shemayim.
Okay, that was the origin sea, and the lower sea is what received it all the time. And now suddenly, the Torah will be so innovative here below that it's like it will come from here. And that's what they mean when they say, sorry, that the body will become the main thing. So how does this tie into the verse? It will be a wonder. That's what he said. You will praise Hashem who made these wonders with you. What's the wonder? Suddenly what was receiving until now, the feminine that until now was receiving, will become the source. So it's also with us and Hashem. It's as if we will be giving to Hashem. That's what it means that he did wonders with you. And that's what it means, that the end of the act will become the beginning of a new one. Meaning it'll return from there. It will elevate up. That's what we call the rise of the feminine. And from this you can understand what it means that my people will no longer feel, what was the word you used yesterday? Degenerate? No, you had a different word. For Yevoshu. You won't be embarrassed, but it's not embarrassed, you had a different word, which was better. Disgraced. Because we say, Me'era yishama kol kala. Right? This is what we sing. Me'era, me'era, Hashem Elokeinu, yishama, yishama, ve'ari Yehuda, and so on and so on. Kol chatan, kol kala. So, soon it should be that the voice of the bride should be heard. The voice, kol hu hamshacha ve'ashpa'ah, is being able to influence, is being able to give sustenance. That's what the voice is. Hashem's voice creates a world. Our voice is to influence, it's to give. Vinat aktiva kol kol Yaakov. Now it says that the voice belongs to Jacob. Mibchinat cha, meaning that it belongs to the masculine. And from there, nimshach hashpa'ah benukva. From there... No, tchal in Aramaic. Zachal. Dalet and Zayin in Aramaic, in Hebrew, interchange. So from the masculine now is the sustenance and the influence on the feminine. But the nukva, the feminine, the bride, doesn't have a voice as a word. Because right now the kingdom is only a receiver, it's only a vessel. And that's why under the wedding canopy, it's the bridegroom who says, because he grooms the bride, I guess that's why they call it the bridegroom. What is it? Groom, what is it? What in the world does that mean? He makes his wife beautiful, or something like that. So the chassan...
Groom is someone, who looks after.
Okay. So he's the one who looks after the bride.
The person who looks after horses in the stable is called a groom.
And so therefore, it's the husband, the chassan, who says, you're sanctified for me. But the woman, she doesn't answer anything, doesn't say anything. What should she say? Something. Or maybe she could say, you make me sanctified, and I'll make you humble. Okay? Something like that. She also has to influence. But now she doesn't say anything, because she has no voice, as it were. But in the future, when kingdom, the feminine sephira, the lowest of all the sephirot, after all the rectifications of the world will be fixed. It's not going to be fixed, but the world will be fixed. And so it becomes, the woman of valor is the crown of her husband, and she has reflecting light. The light that came down is now reflected, like she becomes like a mirror, and she gives it back. And then she becomes, should have been mashpi'ah, with the hey, she becomes the influencer, the one who gives. And then it's called the voice of the bride. And in the relationship between us and who's our husband, Eberster, Hashem, so we're the bride. So we won't be disgraced anymore. Why? It's a disgrace. It's this very interesting thing. You're saying here, look, if you're feminine in your, again, not feminine, they have to be a woman. If you're feminine in the sense that you're not influencing anything in the world, it's a disgrace. So a woman feels inherently some kind of disgrace if she doesn't have a place to influence. That's why she has to have her kingdom. A woman has to have her kingdom, where she's the king there. She's the queen. And the more rectified the husband is, the more he understands that there are areas in which she has to feel, and it's true that way, it really has to be the way that she's influencing him. So if the woman decides we're doing a diet, so the husband can't say I don't want to. He's not allowed to. He's taking away her influence. She wants to do an all meat and potato diet, so he has to eat meat and potatoes. And if she wants to feed him only rabbit food, so he has to eat rabbit food. You got a problem? Before you come home, go eat in a restaurant.
No, stop giving him money. Take away the checkbook.
ולזאת לא יבושו עמי. כי עכשיו הוא כמו שכתוב במשנה, because now the situation is such, as it says in the Mishnah at the end of chapter 7 of Psachim, והקולה הופכת פניה ואוכלת. That when they were eating in public, so the bride in the meal would look away and she would not be seen eating. We talked about this yesterday.
That's
But
the
now
husband.
What?
Now that was only the husband.
Before we're talking about who becomes a person becomes a responsible for some duty for some public duty.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're talking that the bride has the same issue. Al derech ma de'ita beYerushalmi, as it says in Yerushalmi in the first chapter of Orla, Simana de'achid min chavrei bahit mistakla bei, which means that a person who eats from his friends is embarrassed from them. It's like the halachic source, the nigla, the revealed source of what is sometimes called in the Zohar Nahama de Kisufa. There's bread of shame. Bread of shame is when you receive from somebody else. Nobody wants to feel miskin, nevech. Nobody wants to feel that they're dependent on somebody else. So if you want, as it says the Yerushalmi, if you want to know if somebody is eating from somebody else, look at how they eat. You see that they have shame on their face when they eat. Because now the bride, meaning Malchus, kingdom, is only receiving, therefore it has to turn its head not to be seen when it's eating. And that's what it means, that it has busha, it has disgrace on its face. But in the future, because after all the rectifications and the elevations, she will become the crown of her husband. So we too will be influencing, we too will be giving, and therefore we won't have any embarrassment.
This is one of the biggest problems in learning Gemach, caring.
Afterwards, they don't want to look at you.
Give people money, but you have to be extraordinarily careful never to embarrass someone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very complicated. You have to make up all sorts of excuses. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to tell lies.
So those are white lies. And we know the famous story. Who was it that ran into a...
ran into the furnace.
Yeah. What was it? Narukva. Just so that the poor person would not see that he had left the food, the money, whatever it was. And that's what it means, that there is a double blessing here in this verse from Joel. It's not only that there is elevation after elevation, that after you've done something you can reuse it again and go to the next level. Rather, so the second thing is that when after the second part, after you learn how to do this, again, what does it mean? Really, what it means? It means you become a perpetual mobila. That's really what it means. if you're able to take everything that you, it's like recycling. That's the way, maybe that's the way of thinking of it. But recycling sort of misses the point, because recycling says that I take the plastic and I turn it into more plastic, newer plastic. I take the glass, I make new glass out of it. I take the paper, I make new paper out of it. But here the idea is that when you're dealing with human energy, not with inanimate objects, every time you rehash your achievements from the past, you create something better. It's not just glass from glass.
What do you mean rehash your achievements?
Well, let's say when a person's learning a sefer, you finish the Masechet, and then he goes and relearns it. As he finishes, it says Hadran alach, which means repeat, rinse and repeat. And so you do the rinse. The rinse is a Sudas mitzvah. You have a Suda, you have a meal in honor of finishing the book, and then you start from the beginning, right away. I don't know why that's not the custom, by the way. Maybe it is. But I would think that during the Sudas mitzvah, that after you've said finished,
you usually start the next Masechet.
Either the next Masechet, or it would make a lot more sense.
Do the same Masechet.
Same Masechet again.
But the problem is that when you've only done about one Masechet your whole life, so you want to move on and do a second one.
So, but it's not the point. Because you're not getting the benefit of learning something again and again and again. When you learn the second time, it's completely different than the first time. When you learn the 100th time, it's completely different than the 99th time. What do you mean completely different? A lot of things will be the same because you won't have time to rehash it, really. You'll just go over it. But a lot of things will enlighten you suddenly in ways that you didn't think the first time. And you'll suddenly draw new connections that you didn't see. That's a famous example I once heard from Rav Yitzchak, that the difference between the academic world and the Torah world is that you will never find a professor in mathematics walking into a elementary school to sit in on the shira in arithmetic, class on arithmetic. You'll never find them doing it. But it doesn't matter how great you are in Torah, you can walk into a cheder, into an elementary school, and hear the kids learning Bereshis or Vayikra, whatever it is.
You get nachas from it.
And not just get nachas, that anybody can get. And suddenly new insight comes to you because of how they're saying it differently. They're just saying it differently. And suddenly this gives you new insight. And he said this is so common. Look, how is it that the greatest minds in Yiddishkeit, what did they do? They wrote a commentary on Chumash. It says that the Gra, at the end of his years, all he did was learn Chumash. The entire Torah was there. Because you can revisit the arithmetic, and it's completely new every time. That's the biggest difference. So that's what it means here, that every time that you rehash it, that you use it again, it goes to a higher level. So that's the first.
That's because Torah is infinite. So when you never say you got to infinity.
Right.
Because it doesn't.
Can't get there. That's the v'achaltem achol b'savua. But the result of that is that if you become a perpetual mobila, because that's what it means, you become a perpetual machine, because you can. It's as if you can recycle yourself, and every time you go higher, you get into an infinite loop, and then it becomes that you too become like the sun, that you too become the source of the energy. And so by human beings,
It's becoming a shpia,
by human beings becoming, it's like I had for many years in the back of my mind my mother's words when she didn't like what I was saying. So she used to say, what's your new chokhmah? Chokhmas, like how would you translate a chokhmah into English?
Wise
Yeah, what's your new wisecrack? I don't know, whatever. And she used to say this about a lot of things. For me, she said it even about the Torah, that I had like Chiddush, I had this, I had that. And it stuck with me for a long, long time as something derogatory. And I used to think that I don't think it was so much the fact that it was new. I think that she was, from the way I heard it, was she was putting down the idea that you think it's new, but it's not new. I've heard it already. I've heard it all. Don't try to send me something new. Don't try to sell me some new idea. And I remember that when I started hearing like Rav Steinsaltz, so he repeats himself a ton, a lot. I mean, if you know his stories, there's like 200 basic stories. If you were any time around him, you heard, I mean, randomly you would hear 10 of them at least 5 times. Because the ones that he tells more around certain times of the year, if you hung around him, you'd hear it. If you hung around with him like a whole cycle of a year, then you'd probably hear all 200 stories and you'd start hearing them the second time. And he'd repeat them all the time. But there were 200, so there was a lot. And I'm saying that's the number I'm reckoning. And it took me time to understand that it gets better every time. It's like he uses it better. It's like a shaliach doesn't have to invent a new line every time. You just have to connect with it more. You have to understand it more.
It's very interesting because the story Purim Hayom, right?
Yeah.
People say to me every week, "No, you're going to tell Purim Hayom today. You're going to."
They want to hear it.
We want to hear it. They've got the story 100 times. Let them say it again. We want to hear it again.
You learn how to tell it.
You live with that story.
Because you learned how to tell it.
Yeah. No, but
you didn't tell it right the first time. It takes you 100 times to figure out how to say something.
It becomes part of you.
Uh-huh. And then people.
But that's not the same with every story. It's not the same with everything.
So every person has a certain amount of things, chochmas. Let's call them now chochmas. That for him they were new the first time, but then they grow on him. They become part of his personality. They become part of who he is, and they give him fuel, and they become how he influences others. You can't influence others before it's one with you. Before you've rehashed it a few times, you have to go through it a few times.
And yet, interesting, it infuriates my wife if I say the same story.
That's what I said. That's what I heard from my mother. And it took me time to understand that that's my chokhmah.
Why should they know something?
Maybe when you say it to the same person who thinks you want something from them, it drives them nuts. But for other people, you see that it influences. It causes them a lot of joy, and it drives home a message. So, and this is what it means in the Gemara, in the first chapter of Moed Katan, Daf Tet Amud Bet, that it says, "Atidim tzadikim she'amru lifneim kadosh." In the future, we will say to the tzadikim, holy. Okay? Holy. In the same way that we say before Hashem today, kadosh, 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 that He's 3 times holy. Before the tzadikim, we'll say 1 time, kadosh, holy. והנה בתנא דבי אליהו שעמית בעניין אשר עשה עמכם להפליא. מהי להפליא? בין מעשיהם של צדיקים, מעשיהם של רשעים בגיהנום. נראה דברוש להפליא גם כמלשון נפלי נדר. And so on. להפליא also means ונפלאתי. Sorry, ונפלנו, ונפלינו, אני ועמך. And Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem, after the sin of the golden calf, that he should make a distinction between the Jewish people and the rest of the peoples of the earth.
You have the bris milah.
No. He wanted a distinction before God. Not something that we would do, but that He would treat us differently.
He does.
Uh-huh.
Anytime
it came from there.
Out of place, you get
So lafli.
Absolutely.
Right. So lafli means to separate, to draw a distinction. That's what kadosh means. Kadosh means that you're separate, you're different, and you're removed. We saw that last week. in the Maharal. ובגמרא סוף פרק ז' דעירובין ועניין לא ניתנה נזירות אלא להפלאה. That to make a nether, to become a nazir. How do you say a nazir in English?
That's a very interesting question. I don't think there is a word in English for a nazir.
So, it's a nazir. A person who took upon himself extra
not to get
prohibitions. So it's called hafla'a. To make a nether is to lafli.
Abstemious.
It's an ascetic. That's what they call it. ואם להיות קניין מפורש הוא לשון ביאור, אך הוא גם כן לשון פירוד והבדל, כמו בתוך צונון נפרסות. In any case. בכוונת התנא דבי אליהו, היינו שאם היות שיהיה גילוי מבחינת פלא עליון, כמה כחשכה קורה, ואם צדקת מה תיתנו ורבו פשעיך, אם כל זה ימשך משם גם כן להפריש בין מעשיהם של צדיקים, and so on. We'll skip all this, okay? We'll get to bit. ומכל זה יובן גם במדרש, so now we're coming back to our parsha. What does this have to do with our parsha? Because it says something amazing in the Medrash in our parsha. It says, on the pasuk, Ze korban Aaron uvanav, v'yom yimashach oto. This is the korban of Aaron on the day that he's anointed to become the high priest. This is the korban of Aaron. That's how I translated it. But it can also mean Ze korban Aaron. Aaron is the korban. He is the sacrifice. He is the offering. He himself is the offering. Ze she'amar ketuv, says the Medrash, Vayomer lehem ma'ochel yatsa ma'achal, vaya shimshon tamea b'libo ari ochel kol hachayot v'achshav yatsa mimeno ma'achal. How did the whole thing with Samson and his riddle for the Philistine start? He first killed a lion. He came back a month later, and what does he see? That the lion has now become a beehive. So the bees have turned him into a producing ground, some kind of factory for honey. So what happened here? The ma'ochel, the one who eats, the lion who consumes all the other creatures, yatsa ma'achal, came out food. How can that be? Normally, even if you eat, what comes out the other side is not food. But here it became actual food. So you needed bees for this. You needed something else to happen, but it was very contrary to the way the nature works. Why? Because it goes against entropy. Obviously, Samson didn't think about entropy, but he knew, like we do, that if you give something higher, if you consume something high, what comes out the other side is low. That the normal scheme of things is that whatever you consume, you break down, and it comes out less important. It comes out in a lesser form.
That's
but here,
the end product. But in the middle, there are byproducts which are very important.
How?
Take food, and you get all of it, energy, glucose, that goes into your body.
Sedo, that's also a lower form than the food itself. There's less information
there.
there.
Form. It's a release form.
No.
The glucose was trapped inside the food.
No, Sedo, it was there. You didn't do anything with it. You lost all the other information. Think about it.
Stuff was interfering.
There was a chicken. It was running around. It was capable of doing many things. It had some kind of nervous system. It was doing things, very complex things, relatively speaking. And all you got out of it is a few proteins. You took it down.
It gives you life.
Doesn't matter.
You're alive.
That's because you have a system. Those are like the bees. Yeah. What you're saying is that the bees who infiltrated the dead lion's stomach, they're like the higher system. That's like us. We're an open system. So we take in food, and we have higher processes that use the byproducts. But the byproducts are lower than what we consumed. It's just that we take them higher, like the bees use the space in order to create honey. But it's not that the honey is higher than the sorry, it's not that take the bees out a second. But it's not that whatever the lion consumes, he's able to create something that's more than what he consumed. It's always less. That's called entropy. You're always losing energy. You're always losing, another way of saying it is you're losing order. You're losing information. Information is always being lost. Meaning the original thing that you consumed was complex. What you get out of it from the other side, the excrement that comes out, or even the other processes are lower. Because to say glucose or protein, that's lower than the original organism. Something happened to the original organism, it's gone.
But the manure goes into the earth and causes regrowth.
Wonderful, but it's...
So maybe it's more powerful.
It's not about power. It's about order. It's less ordered. And when you have a living cell, all the proteins in the world are not like a living cell. A living cell has what we call low entropy, and the entropy goes up when you consume it, and it just becomes the proteins in it. So that's the zeroth law of thermodynamics. Entropy is always increasing. When is entropy not increasing? Only when you have an open system. An open system is like a human being. It consumes the food from one side, and it causes a increase in the entropy in what comes out. But on the way, those higher entropy entities, the elements that it broke out of the organism that it ate, be it a plant or a chicken, it doesn't matter, it uses now for higher processes. But the higher processes will never happen by themselves. You have to have a system that knows how to use these lower elements. Okay? You have to have a system that knows what to do with these proteins. And then they become part of thought, they become part of motion, they become part of other things that we do. But overall, there's always a loss of information, there's a loss of order. What was the chiddush? That the ochel na'asa ma'achal, that usually what it comes out is not at the same level as what ate. And here you're saying that what ate brought out something higher than itself. And how is that? Very simple. Because the lion is, what is he? He's all gvura. And the honey that came out is all chesed. And it's all sweet. And that you don't find. Nobody has sweet smelling sweat.
See you tomorrow. What time did I need tomorrow?
Wait, there's just one more sentence. That's the idea of a perpetual mobile.
Perpetual motion.
Okay? Because you're taking something low and you're actually bringing it higher. Okay? And that's what he wants to get at. That is what Torah is supposed to do. Every time you repeat it, you're taking something lower and you're elevating it. It's not you're not continually going down. You're continually rising up. Okay. So what do you mean?